I wanted to go live on YouTube. I don't know if YouTube does the same thing because I haven't posted enough on YouTube. Um, After presenting an honest video journal entry in another place, thereby creating a foundation of honesty. Um, the stock market is an interesting tool for purpose of I don't think the stock market is an honest, solid tool for as a gauge to what's best for uh, youth coming up. Youth, again, by my definition, as being the chronological age group of 40 years old in 2022, chronological, as in as in not actually 70, 80, or 90 years old presenting via alias and or facelift uh, themselves as younger ages, as in chronologically aged 40 and younger in 2022. And I myself am chronologically aged 58 uh, as of April 10th, 2021. And my eyes look brown right now, but my eyes are still actually blue. Um, the stock market, there's a company that I'm going to speak on that I'm not taking a side one way or the other on because again I view the stock market as a house of cards tool uh, used for the purpose of gathering information and different people's responses at and according to business and political and financial alliances. Um, which, of course, when I was younger, I didn't see through the stock market the way that I see through the stock market today. Um, um, but my reason for getting on, and again, I still am seeing that big bow like this, like a big clown bow, like somebody's either trying to tag me as part of the insane clown posse, or oh, that clown again, or I'm never assigned positive respect um, for being an honest person by those who are dishonest and corrupt. Um, um, and if the Insane Clown Posse, which is, as probably many people know, I have no idea what kind of music they play, but I know they're represented that little hunched over um, logo type thing carrying the hatchet. And of course the It Clown from the Stephen King novel. Um, the reason that I'm asking or speaking about the stock market today is because of the company, excuse me, um, that showed on my Facebook page, as in the one of those little interrupting things that come on your computer notifications. Oh, such and such stock is way up, and this is kind of um uh I've asked the question, and I know that I'm not going to get an honest answer, um, because the collegiate societies are made up of secret societies. But I've asked the question because of a company and a warehouse that was located near where one of the shelters I was staying at in Abingdon, Maryland, and it was called AGCO. And for whatever reason, it looked like I was remote viewing, and this is one of those subliminal threats. Subliminal as in placing in your psyche um, a remote view, as in revealing at what looked like a little girl who was sitting on a chair and bound on the chair. And when I walked outside, my eyes were directed to this warehouse looking building just outside of the not outside of the industrial park, because the shelter was located within a business industrial park. Um, and my eyes were directed towards this uh, warehouse type looking building that was called and labeled with AGCO, AGCO. And again, this was in Abingdon, Maryland. And um, never knowing where to take this type of information, because of I'm constantly surrounded by very threatening presences for a number of years since my children were taken from me. In 1987 and in 2003 and in 2007 and in 2011. I'm going to have to take a look at those years and see how they add up. But Paul Santana comes to mind, and Alan White. Paul Santana is an association that I had, and again, not at the time, but in retrospect and looking back, I continue to wonder whether Paul Santana was and is a long established pimp or um, mob association with some particular mob, and appearing on several different levels of existence. And I call Paul Santana these days in association, not call as in literally call, but I call them the duo of these two men and actually have wondered if they're the same person. But physically, facially, if Paul Santana lost a whole lot of weight and shrunk down from this big, huge person that he was when I met him at Father Woody's, as perceived by me, an innocent meeting, and whereby he, if he has these involvements and historically has these involvements with any mob or any practices of pimpery or anything associated therewith, and his initial appearance in my life at that time was for the purpose of yet another pimp trying to turn me into a hooker. My meeting, or it was simply by, there was no motivation, there was no premeditation, there was no he walked into Father Woody's, and I can't even remember the exact situation, if we were sitting at the same table together and struck up a conversation. Anyway, as far as premeditation, other than me waking up while I was at the shelter in Lakewood, on the border of Lakewood and Denver, there was no premeditation on my part, other than waking up and saying, okay, I need somewhere to go, I'm going to Father Woody's. Or waking up in my from sleeping outside, because that particular shelter was one of the very many where, as a female unwilling to participate in illegal activities, I was forced out of many shelters where I was. And so this period of time was a period of time where I spent a lot of time sleeping outside in the wintertime and the summertime, and less time in the shelter then. And Paul Santana is one of two men who I associate together these days, as in, I feel like they knew each other back then. They operated on conducted business. Like when one came into town, the other one would go town, but there was communication, as in they were a team, like tag team even. And I feel like if Paul Santana, in his big, huge physical build, lost a bunch of weight, he and Alan White, the person who I knew as Alan White on the East Coast in Maryland, could be the same person, as though they could be twin brothers, and they had a very similar, deep voice tone. And I call them the Spice Brothers, because Paul was who introduced me to smoking the drug they called spice. And I don't know what it was made of or what, but I smoked it with him like 2 or 3 times, and I absolutely hated it. Because it was like, I don't even want to describe it because I don't want to feel it. I don't want to connect with it. I don't want to. It was very, like, even higher toned, higher level, like it was connecting my psyche to this, like, really painful frequency level. And I didn't like it. And I think I smoked it with him 2 or 3 times. And I experienced a very terrifying it was a terrifying experience, although I could not identify other than the very high frequency as to why I felt completely terrified when I smoked it with him. And because he called it spice, I now call him Spice Brothers, him and Alan White. I call them the Spice Brothers, even though I never smoked spice with Alan White that I know of. I didn't have that type of terrifying experience as in psychological via a very huge, intense, high frequency. The terrifying experience that I had with Alan White was much more real in regard to his ability to manipulate the local Bel Air, Harford County Police Sheriff's Office. So that in itself, knowing my own innocence, was an indication of Alan White's connections to levels much higher than what our residential existence, which was homeless in a tent for myself, and may have been simply a strategic existence, small portion of what he was actually doing, because I wasn't in Alan White's presence like 24/7 for any more than like, I want to say, a 36-hour time period in the 3 or 4 months that I associated with him. So even within the time that I had a forming and breaking apart relationship with him, I didn't spend constant time with him. With Alan, I never spent constant time with Alan White at any time. So there was plenty of time for him to have traveled around. And again, knowing my own innocence is an indication and litmus test for me as to be able to question, okay, now why was he able to get away with threatening my life and walking through and past my tent, hollering and screaming in his normal manner, down the path, and the Harford County Sheriff's Office, 5 Harford County Sheriffs coming up like a half an hour, 45 minutes later, after I had gone back to sleep in my hammock in the middle of the day. And 3 of those 5 Harford County Sheriff's Department or sheriff's officers with high-powered rifles pointed at me, standing like 15 feet from my hammock. Miss Henderson! Miss Henderson! And me like this, waking up from my nap after having the maybe 5-minute altercation 45 minutes or an hour before, Alan White coming from his tent and him trying to get me to come up to his tent and me saying, no, I'm not. I'm thinking, and him coming through and hollering just through and past my tent, and then stopping long enough to threaten my life, and then going down to the and the Harford County Sheriff's Department. And in between, I thought I had gone back to sleep, back to my nap. It was practically the middle of the day. I really honestly, other than it being completely daytime and I think pretty close to the middle of the day, somewhere between like 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the Harford County, Mr. Alan White has called us because and reported that you threatened his life. When actually Alan White was who threatened my life as he was through the Bel Air bypass and past my tent, and he woke me up out of my sleep. And he had weapons, and I didn't. One of which was a machete that he was showing off to me weeks before when we were still in like congenial speaking relationship. And I was like, cool, yeah, whatever. I'm not a weapons person normally. And he kept it in a cooler outside of the tent. So when the Harford County Sheriff's Department, after he threatened my life, this is the kind of table turn thing that Alan White is very strategic and very experienced at using on me anyway. And I'd already realized that. It's the way that he was able to hold me on the string of being in communication with him, because it wasn't long after he and I had met that I knew, just from certain things, for instance, him showing me a machete after having arguments based, like illogical arguments based on pretty much him hollering and screaming because he was drunk and coming up the path. Just really not even making any sense as he was hollering and screaming coming up. And I'm remembering one specific instance where it was like pitch dark, and he said to me before he left the tent, you wait up here, I'm going to go down and fly a sign and try to get some money. Well, the money that he tried to get was for his alcohol. And so I have learned, based on my experiences, I have learned a way to present myself in psychologically for my own safety. And I've learned to identify, okay, this is one of those people who I need to separate from. And from experience, I know that he's one of those people those people who like to try to keep you on the line for the sake of whatever it is that he's got going on that he wants to use me for, that I don't want to have anything to do with. So I was already planning my breaking away from Alan White at this point, and had almost broken away completely. But this particular day, and he walked by my tent, and I had a small tent and a hammock, and I was taking a nap midday in my hammock as he walked past and through, hollering and screaming in his very and after he cleared the path and had stopped hollering, I fell back to sleep in my hammock, and wasn't aware, because he wasn't carrying it in his hand at the time, and I was sleeping before he walked by hollering and screaming. And first, as per usual, he stopped at my he came up the path, hollering and screaming. Not me. He came up the path hollering and screaming and woke me up out of my nap, and came over to my tent, as he many times did, to try to get me to go up to his tent with him. And I said no, and stood my ground, and then went back to sleep. And because I didn't want to engage in a sexual or personal relationship with him on any level after a certain point, because I knew that I was becoming and feeling increasingly endangered around him. And so after leaving his tent and stopping at my tent, hollering increasingly as he was approaching, he wasn't hollering increasingly as he was approaching my tent, leaving his tent. He always approached my tent, whether he was coming, walking back to his tent from the main road and the main path, or he always approached me very gentlemanly, because the first things out of his mouth would always be, "Hey, you want to come back up to my tent with me?" And like I said, at a certain point, I was already planning to break away from him completely, and had to, for myself, identify the times at when I could actually do that safely without him coming after me. But whenever I would say no, he would walk off, hollering and screaming, as though he felt like I didn't have a choice, or it wasn't my choice, as to he was just being polite in his invitation, like he was actually making a demand, and I said no. It is the way it really felt like. And he, within whatever existences that he had, possibly as a pimp, possibly as a drug dealer, possibly as a human trafficking representative, wasn't accustomed to a woman who had absolutely nothing but a tent and some clothing and food stamps And I'm trying to think if I was collecting that big $180 at the time. I think I was. I don't even think I had a phone at the time because I didn't have a phone very much at all. Um, so when I said no, then he would go off in whatever direction that he was headed to or from. Um, and so when the Harford County Sheriff's Department, 5 of them showed up at my tent site. Now, again, keep in mind, the Harford County Sheriff's Department was who directed me to the establishment to pick up a tent and directed me to the Bel Air bypass as a safe place that I could set up my tent and sleep. And so they show up, 5 of them, 3 of them with high-powered rifles, and hollering at me with their rifles pointed at me, 3 of them out of 5. Mr. White has called the Harford County Sheriff's Department complaining that you threatened his life. And I'm standing, or I'm waking up from my nap, and now, get out of the hammock, get out of the hammock. And now I'm standing up at this point in lotus position, standing up and hysterically crying uncontrollably. Get yourself together, Miss Henderson. I'm like thinking to myself, there's 5 men standing in front of me, 3 with high power rifles pointed, 15 to 20 feet from my being. And I'm waking up from a nap wondering what the heck is going on. And I'm crying hysterically. I can hardly get my words out because I'm terrified. And Mr. White has reported that you threatened his life with a machete. And I'm standing there, I didn't threaten his life. He threatened mine, and I don't have a machete, and he has a machete, and they're going on and on and on. And with that one of them who wasn't, I honestly can't say whether he was one of the 3 who had a high. One of them then left the surrounding and walked behind me. Oh, well, then what's this? And like 15 feet, hit Alan White's tents off this way, and the Harford County Sheriff's walked around my tent, behind my tent, directly to a machete. The machete that Mr. White had shown to me, bragging about, isn't this great? And I'm like, to me, not really, but whatever. You're a guy, I guess. And the officer brought it over like this. What is this? What is this? I said, he must have put that there because I didn't. Now, keep in mind, and thinking back, that the sheriff walked directly towards the machete. It wasn't like he searched my tent site. It was like he walked and I'm trying to make sense of what the heck is going on. And So again, within this experience, because I knew my level, my innocence complete, I now can use this experience as a litmus test in regard to Mr. White's level of existence within uh, weaponry and money and influences, connections within the Harford County Sheriff's Department at the time. And so finally they relaxed after I said, "Have you fingerprinted?" Because whatever they reported to me that Alan White had reported to them, um, I knew my fingerprints weren't on the machete, and his were. And the machete hadn't come into play anywhere near my tent within any interaction, not words from my mouth. I hadn't threatened his life. That he and even when we were at his tent, like 2 weeks before, is approximate 2 or 3 weeks before was when he was showing me the machete. And that and his reaction to the machete itself was probably a straw, but that sort of made my decision for me when I made the decision and had already been like, yeah, I don't want to continue a relationship with this guy. I want to get away from him. And was already starting to formulate how I was going to get away from him. And that day that he was showing me the machete, instead of fearing me into continuing a relationship with him, actually acted and worked in the opposite. And I'm like, okay, now I really want to get away with this guy, although my the way I acted toward him, I knew that he was had a very volatile personality, violent and volatile. As in, he went off at anything. We could be having a very congenial conversation, then all of a sudden, and with no one else being anywhere near in the vicinity, again. So when he had shown me the machete and was bragging about that, to me was really because a machete is like, what for? What do you? And so when I finally said, "Have the fingerprinted," and again, I was still in hysterics, as in crying, because I felt terrified, because there were high-powered rifles pointed at me, 3 out of the 5 men present, and 15 or 20 feet from me. And and I feel like luckily for me, I was able to put together enough and said the words, had it fingerprinted, because I knew I knew I was, first of all, I knew I was innocent. I was innocent of the whole freaking present time accusation, and I was innocent of interactions, any interactions that I had with Alan White. And even upon the first time that I went back to his tent with him, I felt psychologically manipulated. I felt psychologically captured. And so anyway, I call him and Paul Santana because my suspicion is that Paul Santana and Alan White very possibly know each other, although one I knew on the East Coast in Maryland, and the other I knew here in Colorado. And physically, as in body stature, body type, they were. Alan White was very skinny, very like half the width of me, and Paul Santana was about twice the width of me. But I think very possibly they work as a tag team. And when one comes into Colorado, the other one heads out to the East Coast and vice versa. I'm receiving a side message that says, "Welcome to live chat. Remember to guard your privacy and abide by our community guidelines." And as far as I know, I didn't join an online community by signing on to do a live stream. And the three, I guess, participants are tuning in. Of course, I can question what and who actually, but it says girls 4.xyz free vert girls chat, and there's 3, and that comes up triplicate on the side, as in I don't know who's but of course I realize that those could be anyone. It could be 3 men who want me to feel threatened by my what I'm stating. But I'm going to end the stream right now because things are sort of feel very high level, like possibly 1 or 2 or both of the men who I am referring to are listening. And they should be aware that within the best of my ability, and knowledge, I'm going to continue to state my own truth, the truth of the experiences I've had. Um, and the names of my firsthand experiences. Because why? Because I need and want my children back in my life. And I need and want to feel safe from thug and mob and gang related threats that I've been receiving in regard to my children's safety. And regardless of the number of youth who get on my Facebook page on the side as prospective friends who present this, oh, we don't care what you say, we like our lifestyle, and I know that when I'm hearing and feeling a visceral connection to my children and can hear screams and cries, that somebody's not being honest about their, we don't care what you think, miss. We think that this is a great way to live, and da 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 da. That I think is I can safely assume the pimps programming hookers into in and as a way of the pimps trying to discourage me from telling the truth and presenting the truth, and possibly establishing connections to other biological mothers who may be working within their own abilities to looking for their own children, who might be in a similar situation that I am in regard to the same kind of experiences, maybe of ending human trafficking.